to the heart and take me on a journey of letting go, getting lost in you.
Hey, National Park Church, here again for another week of our James class. Excited that you all will be joining us. As we begin, I'll say this again in the service, so if you're watching this after, you're probably hearing this for a second time. But I just want to thank our congregation for the love and support that you all have shown Kara and me after the passing of my grandfather. I can't tell you how overwhelmed we've been with the cards that we've received, with the Facebook messages, with the text, with the calls. I think that almost everyone in the congregation has reached out to our family, and we just want you to know how much we appreciate that, how it hasn't touched us lightly, that it's had a major influence on us to know how deeply loved we are. And because this is a unique experience for us, I feel like I've gotten to see the love and compassion of the National Park Church in a unique way because of the ways that y'all have reached out to us and shown compassion and offered yourself to us. I can't tell you how many people have said, if you need anything, if you need to call, if you anything you need, we want to be here for you. And I just want to say that I greatly appreciate that. I appreciate the way that you've loved myself and my family, and your small gestures that may seem insignificant have a major impact on myself and Kara and my family at large. We feel surrounded by, we feel loved, we feel cared about, we feel known, and that's been an incredible gift. So thank y'all so much for that. Thank you for surrounding us and putting your arms around my family this past week, and we can't thank you enough for that. I want to pray, and then we'll dive into the end of James chapter 3 this morning. Let's pray. God, it's a gift to be part of your church, and I know that sometimes the church doesn't always live up to what you want it to be, but I know that National Park Church this past week and its compassion and love that's shown my family has given us a glimpse of what Jesus is like. I thank you for allowing us to be part of this family, and I thank you for the servants of you that take the time to show compassion to those that are hurting and those that are in need. God, I pray as we dive into James chapter 3 that you will open our eyes to see what you want us to see and our ears to hear what you want us to hear. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. So this week we're continuing our series in James chapter 3. We're looking at the end of James chapter 3, and he's jumping back into a discussion about wisdom. If you remember in chapter 1, James tells the people he's writing to that you should pray for wisdom, that God will give you wisdom. And in this text, he's unpacking a little bit more in detail, what does that wisdom look like? And it's significant because for James, wisdom that he affirms, he says, comes from above, comes from God, which means that it's not in perfect harmony with what we might normally associate with wisdom. Now, I'm not saying there's zero overlap, that there's no overlap between what we would traditionally describe as wisdom and the wisdom that comes from God. But I think a verse or a text that needs to be behind any concept or conversation about wisdom is Paul's text in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Because he reminds us that oftentimes what God reveals as wisdom, and his paradigmatic example of that is Jesus hanging on the cross, is seen as folly to human beings. So we cannot assume that prior to encountering the living Christ that we totally understand what wisdom is, that wisdom is informed to us by the very life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And within that tradition, James is bringing us a concept of what is wisdom. So I want to do as we always do. I want to read the text and then make a few observations from it. We'll be starting in James chapter 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. It's interesting to me, just the way it begins, because it's such a James type of beginning, right? Because when you and I, and we've talked about a lot in this series, think about wisdom, we might think of intellect. Like really intelligent people are probably the wisest people. Wisdom would be expressed within a lecture or a classroom, or when someone speaks eloquently, we go, man, that person must have wisdom. And James just cuts through all of that. He says, let me see your wisdom and good conduct. Doesn't that sound like James? Hey, don't talk to me about wisdom. Don't share your intelligent speeches or your views on things. Just show me your wisdom through your conduct. I think you could summarize James as the show me book. That every time I want to articulate something, not that James is entirely against that, but he wants to say, show it to me. Let me see it. Don't talk to me about your faith. Why don't you just live it out? Don't talk to me about your religion. Why don't you just live it out? James seems to have this understanding that the fullest display of wisdom will be played out in the real life experiences of you and me. And then he begins to say, here is the difference between wisdom from above, which you could translate as wisdom from God, compared to wisdom that we see that comes from the earth or from the world. And it's significant because two things he highlights of wisdom of the world is selfish ambition and jealousy. And so in my summation, what we're wrestling with is a question of, what does it mean to be fully human? That James is actually getting down to asking the question, what is a good human life to live? And I think James is getting and accessing that question through what is a wise life? What is a life that pervades or pursues wisdom in every area? And a life, he says, that does not pursue that is one that is marked by jealousy and selfish ambition. Well, what are lives that are marked by jealousy and selfish ambition? What does that tell you about the undergirding of that kind of life? Well, I think it begins with this concept that if you are primarily jealous and your motivation is selfish ambition, then you have determined that human life, that your life is primarily about getting what you want, what you desire, and to achieve your own personal success. Right? Let's parse that out just a little bit. If I'm jealous, that means I'm looking at the success of somebody else. I'm looking at the accomplishments of somebody else, and I'm saying, I wish I had that for me. Jealousy is saying, that's not fair. It should be mine. Give that to me. Which means that when I look at somebody else's, if you want to use the language of success or flourishing, it seems like it's taking away from my flourishing and my success. Which is really important, right? Because how that frames every relationship now is every relationship is a competitive relationship. Jealousy marks that I assume my posture with everybody else in the world is one of competition. Jealousy is the expression of, if something good is happening to somebody else, then it must necessarily mean that it is an infringement upon my flourishing and my success. I like to do this, but give yourself a test case. When you hear something good about somebody else, what is your immediate response? Are you the kind of person who can easily rejoice in the successes of other people? Or do you begin to play the game of, that's not fair. That's not fair. When you hear somebody, and this hits me right, at a weak point in my life. When you hear someone else be affirmed, wow, you're so good at this, or oh, that was such a gift, or we're so thankful that you did that for us, does my immediate response go, man, I want to engage in that affirming moment? Or do I begin to say, but what about me? Why aren't people noticing what I've been doing? Why aren't people acknowledging all the things that I've done? Why aren't people looking at me? Jealousy is, I would say, a symptom of a kind of life that assumes that the relationships we have with one another and with the world is primarily competitive. It is really unhealthy to have a view of a human life that is good, assuming that the way that I work my way up, the way that I achieve my highest success, the way that I achieve ultimate flourishing is in competition with everybody else. You hear it all the time. I'm out for number one. I got to take care of me. My job is to make sure that I get to a certain level. And if that means that everybody else doesn't reach that level, I'm sorry. I'm out for number one. Well, if that's kind of your posture in the world, then you're going to be jealous when you look around and other people seem to be at different levels than you are. That somehow the assumption is that I can be fully a flourishing human being in isolation to everybody else. And if anything, everybody else is not intended to make me more fully alive, but they're in competition with me. That my full embracing and embodiment of my humanity is contingent upon me making it to a particular level, regardless of what that means for everybody else around me. And jealousy is an example of me looking at everybody around me saying, that's not fair. Why do they get that and I don't get that? It's a reflection of the fact that I think that my humanity is expressed most fully when I'm seeking myself. And we see that directly with the second one, right? Selfish ambition. Selfish ambition is not inherently saying that all ambition is wrong. It's saying when ambition is primarily about, I want what I want, and I want my own success, regardless of the implications for anybody else. My ambition is solely about me. If that's my motivation, he says, yeah, that makes sense in the world. You're going to be told that. And you and I are told that every day. We're told, we live in a society that tells us every day, you got to look out for yourself. You got to make it for yourself, because everybody else is intending to work their way up to the top. So if you're not pursuing that in your own individual and isolated way, then you're going to fall to the back of the pack. So your goal is to look out, as we said, for number one. James says if you're looking out for number one, if your ultimate goal is about expressing and achieving and seeking with uncompromising and unnuanced, in an unnuanced way, your own self-interest, your own self-ambition, then yeah, you may express a certain kind of wisdom, and the world may look at you and go, you're really good at that. You're really good at working your way to the top. But James would say that's actually wisdom that is not the wisdom that comes from God. He would go so far as saying that ends up in many ways becoming demonic. Think about that. Paul talks about this in the same way when he's talking about the church community. There's this beautiful line in Romans chapter 12, which is the exact opposite of what James talks, or exact opposite of what James articulates as the wisdom of the world. He doesn't say, outdo one another in seeking your own interest, outdo one another in seeking your own ambitions, outdo one another in reaching to the top. What does he say? Outdo one another in showing honor. We've talked about this before, but what Paul doesn't say is, this is the free life. The free life is I get to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. Right? Many of us define freedom that way. Freedom is the ability to have no restraints. I do what I want, when I want, how I want to do it. I can seek whatever I want to seek, and I can not seek whatever I don't want to seek. Paul says the highest point of freedom is when I'm able to know that I want something and I think something is good, but it's going to hurt my brother or sister, and I have the ability to choose what's best for them, even if I don't think it's best for me. Paul says that's freedom. Freedom is not seeking your own selfish ambitions. Freedom is seeking the good of those you're in community with. Seeking the good of your neighbor. Jesus talks about it too, right? It seems like the apostles are on board with the wisdom of the world. They're jealous of the possibility that the other apostles may be at seats of prominence when the kingdom comes into being, when Jesus initiates the culmination of his kingdom. And they're jockeying for position. Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to sit at your right and your left hand? Who's going to be at those positions of prominence? And Jesus says, oh, I get why you would think that way, because that's how the world thinks. That's how people think in the world, is they're trying to jockey for their primary positions, right? We're in a political election year, and all behind closed doors, everybody's jockeying to make sure that if you're elected, what are you going to give me if I support you now? Everybody's thinking in those categories, and Jesus blows everything up. And he says, yeah, you want to be the greatest in my kingdom? Do the opposite of have selfish ambition. Put yourself at the lowest, meaning put yourself at the position of serving. Put yourself in the position of giving yourself for another person. Be the one who tries to outdo one another in love. Rush to the point of being the one who gets the opportunity to serve and to elevate and to make much of your brother and sister. In that way, you become the greatest in this peculiar and strange kingdom that I'm bringing about. Jesus' own life, and I know it sounds like a cliche now, but Jesus expresses his freedom not by getting to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He doesn't exude selfish ambition. He doesn't exude jealousy. What he exudes is a kind of life that says, I am so free. I am so free, without restraints of the Roman Empire, without the restraints of the Jewish religious leaders who are trying to shut me down, without the expectations of every person I come in contact with that want me to be this kind of person and want me to say this kind of thing and want me to do this kind of thing. I am so free from any of those constraints. I get to actually do what I'm here to do, which is seek the good of humanity, to seek the good, in his terms, of his neighbor. So the wisdom of the world seems, as James is talking about, to be preoccupied with a kind of self-seeking. James says, yeah, that wisdom makes sense within the construal that the world sets out before you, but the wisdom that comes from above actually is opposite of that. That actually becomes demonic in this kind of structure, because a person who seeks themselves above everything else no longer can fully be what Jesus reveals is true wisdom, which is seeking the good of another. I think that's the description, right, in verses 16 and 17. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder of every vile practice. That it's going to end up being chaos, and we see that when you're seeking your own and I'm seeking my own and we're in competition with each other, it's just going to end up being a disaster. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. Now we could go through all of those, but I think you could summarize the wisdom that James articulates in these verses is a kind of wisdom that seeks the good of the other. I know that's a broken record. I know that I use that phrase all the time. But it's because I'm desperate for you and me to realize that this rat race of seeking my own, my self-interest, is going to lead to the kind of chaos that James talks about. And it's only when I take my eyes off of myself, or as Jesus would say, when I lose my life for his sake. And when I lose my life, I'm losing my life in the same way he lost his life, giving it for the world, that in this strange way, I actually become fully what I was always intended to be. That being human is not trying to possess and control, that I'm going to make myself who I am. But it's in the act of giving myself away to others that I become most fully myself. I do that by seeking peace, showing gentleness to those that may not deserve me to be gentle toward them, showing no partiality. I'm not going to be the kind of person who says, well, I'm only going to seek the affirmation. I'm only going to seek the good of those that can enhance my selfish ambitions. So I'm going to be very calculating in who I choose to love and who I don't love. Because I know that if I love that kind of person, if I love them, they can help me get up to the top of the ladder. They can help me achieve what I want to achieve. So I'm going to smooch up to them and I'm going to discard these people over here. Right? So he's getting back to what he says earlier in his letter. When people walk through the door, there is a form of selfish ambition when you see the rich, wealthy, powerful person walk in and you show them honor. Because what you're doing is you think they have something that can help you at the end of the day. And these poor, raggedy people that walked in, they probably can't help you. And James says if you show that kind of partiality, you've misunderstood what the kingdom is all about. You're full of mercy. You're ready to receive. You're ready to experience harm done to you and to not extend it with rejection and hatred, but to share mercy. Let's just be honest. That doesn't always fit into my context of being ambitious. Mercy takes time. Mercy seems to put roadblocks because then I have to take the time to love and show compassion to someone who in the moment is not very lovable. And that's not always within my calendar of how my ambitions are going to be reached. It seems to be a detour off of me seeking my own. But if my category is not seeking my own but loving others, then I recognize that even if in the moment it doesn't feel like the thing I want to do most, that person needs me to extend mercy to them. So again, the summary that I would give to these two ways of wisdom is: one assumes that you become most fully human when you seek your own selfish interest. The other says you become most fully human when you seek love, which is seeking the good of the other as other. Now, this is not some intellectually complicated lesson, but just do an inventory of your own life as I want to do an inventory of my life. How much of my day is spent seeking my own selfish ambitions? How much of my day is plagued with being jealous all the time in big and small ways? That's not fair. Well, they really made a big deal about what they did, but what about all the things I've been doing at the church? What about all the things I've been doing at the school? What about all the things I've been doing at my job? What about all the things? And you spend your day being eaten alive by that jealousy. Or I'm working my way to the top. I got to get to the top. I got to be successful. What's best for me in this situation? What adds to my comfort? What makes me feel good about what's happening? If your day is saturated with that kind of thinking, James would say, you got the wisdom of the world. If your day is saturated with, how can I bring peace? How can there be some gentleness in this situation? How can I not show partiality? Because my main question is not how can you make my life easier or better, but you are of infinite value because you're a human being made in the image of God. How can I love you? What if those were the dominant questions? What if those were the dominant preoccupations of us as the people of God? I feel like I say this every week, but you're looking at someone who is so far from that. But here's the main principle. If you live life that's primarily about seeking self, you will never be fully human. You may disagree with me. You're welcome to try it. But if Christianity is true, if Jesus is right in saying that you only find your life when you lose it, then that means you can work as hard as you can to reach those ambitions. You can be a competitor and you can defeat the entire field and you can reach your way to the top. But I promise you, if you ever make it to the top, you'll realize I'm not more fully human, I'm less human. But if you will seek peace, if you will be a person of gentleness, if you will exude mercy in every element of your life, if you will be the kind of person who is sincere and does not show partiality, even if it doesn't look like you've reached very high levels of achievement within our society, you will be more fully human than the one who has allowed their ambition to dominate every aspect of their life. This is such an important question because it is one of the most fundamental questions we can ask and answer. What kind of pursuit of being human are we going to pursue? The one that is primarily about self-seeking, or are we going to pursue the one that is about giving ourselves for the good of the other as other? Love you, National Park. Look forward to seeing you all soon. And again, thank you so much for the love and support you've shown my family this past week. Have a great week.